Good morning, everyone. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands upon which this work was undertaken, the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation and the Gadabunud and Gulidjan people of the Maar Nation. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I had the great pleasure of attending the Dieback Information Group conference last year in person and presenting on the first stage of the Phytophthora management program as part of the Wild Otways Initiative. And I spent most of my time describing what we were going to do. And I'm excited to be back today to present on what we actually did across the past year and what that means for Phytophthora management in the eastern states of Australia. Firstly, I'll briefly run through the project context and location, and then I'll detail the outcomes. This project was funded by the Australian government, and our goal was to protect and improve the plight of these fabulous furry creatures, all EPBC listed threatened species. The initiative was part of a broader $6 million program addressing threats to threatened mammals in the Otways landscape. The initiative was run by the Corangamite Catchment Management Authority with a manager and project officer coordinating the programs. However, as most of the work was undertaken on public land with two different tenures, the model built for this program was collaborative. We also built in two project officers, one in each of the land management agencies, DECA and Parks Victoria. These officers have facilitated liaison, permits, access, local knowledge, mapping and monitoring. Partnering with land managers has been integral in transferring research findings rapidly and embedding them into management practices. Contractors and researchers have undertaken the majority of the on-ground work. DECA manages the Forest Park, which is about 40,000 hectares in the Otways, and Parks Victoria manages national parks and state parks, which is approximately 104,000 hectares across the Otways. The importance of the relationship between our agencies cannot be emphasised enough. More has been done in the past year in relation to the treatment of this disease than has been done in the past 20 years. I'd like to give a huge shout out to my wonderful colleagues in Western Australia and to those in Victoria with extensive knowledge in the area who've helped in many ways to shape our monitoring and management and the logistics for this project. I'd particularly like to thank Dr. Sarah Barrett and Dr. Charlie Bain and Tom Mansfield, who visited us from WA and shared their knowledge and advice, and to Danica Delaporte from Gleven Consulting, who trained our staff and contractors in phosphate spraying. The Otway Ranges are about 2 hours drive from Melbourne. The average rainfall in the eastern Otways is about 600 millimetres per year, at Cape Otway 900 millimetres, and in the wet forests up to 1500 millimetres per year. We have a range of habitats across the landscape with some fabulous beaches if you can survive the cold, and of course the very famous Great Ocean Road with the 12 Apostles. We have waterfalls, estuaries, cool temperate rainforest and a combination of tall eucalypt forest. But the focus for this program was on our dry sclerophyll forest and our heathlands, which are similar to Western Australian heaths with grass tree dominance and sandy soil and a really biodiverse understory with many orchids. The areas we focused on were the heathy woodlands and the heathlands of the Carlisle and the Anglesey area, which you can see in these locations in the pink. This is a demonstration of mapping of the threat throughout the study area. It's not an actual identification through testing or interpretation, but the threat relative to the access and habitat suitability. And what we did for this project is that we advanced the progress of mapping in Victoria. And the first thing we did was to map priority protection areas. This was done through a series of workshops involving key land managers and a structured decision-making process to determine the management actions that were going to be most effective for our area. We mapped 7 key areas, which you can see in the map here in red, and we also had a threat abatement plan designed specifically for our area. The structured decision-making for management actions involve things like doing nothing, track hardening, illegal track management and rehabilitation, application of phosphate via aerial spraying and hand spraying, and other options like public education and hygiene stations, and things like surveillance, which were considered but deemed to be ineffective or the outcomes highly uncertain. The results landed on a low-intensity phosphate-based strategy for managing Phytophthora in the Otway Ranges. The mapping part of the program was originally going to be through using NDVI images and possibly the use of AI, but unfortunately the timeframes and the budget did not allow that type of analysis. Instead, we reverted to a human analysis of individual pixels of very high resolution aerial photographs down to 2 centimetres, and then ground truthing to determine the accuracy of this method. Out of 3,696 hectares, we monitored 3,484 hectares of the Carlisle Heath. And you can see from this mapping here, we've got different colours that indicate the infestation. And you can see here we've devised an assessment schema which talks about the orange and red areas being severe and moderate signs of disease, whereas the green areas are the areas that have very little infection, and the blue and grey areas are uninterpretable. This is the first time that we've had such detailed analysis of the disease impacts in the Carlisle, and the disease is more widespread than we first thought. This mapping is going to allow us to target priority areas for management actions, which includes phosphate spraying. And I'll hand over to Michael Mackenzie from Parks Victoria, who spearheaded the phosphate spraying program.
Thanks, Jess. So Parks Victoria applied for the APVMA permit as opposed to the project contractor. This was done in order to be able to use phosphate across Victoria where Phytophthora is an issue, and so we can continue using phosphate in the Otways post the Wild Otways Initiative project. The permit we were granted was a 20 litre per hectare rate and is only valid for 3 years. Then we'll need to reapply. Aerial and ground spraying was conducted in the priority protection areas at the off-label rates. We were granted the permit in October last year, which only allowed us a short time frame to get organised and spray before the Wild Otways project concluded at June 30. Being a new program, we had to train staff and contractors in the application of phosphate and purchase dedicated equipment. Aerial spraying was organised and delivered by Dr. Margaret Karklis and Dr. Barbara Wilson using a local aircraft spraying contractor. Local agency staff assisted with track closures from the 3 agencies, and those 3 agencies were DECA, Parks Victoria and the Corangamite Catchment Management Authority. Aerial spraying treated 10.5 hectares and ground spraying treated 22.5 hectares. Phytotoxicity testing was carried out post-spraying. We trained 5 contractors, including traditional owner groups, in the use of ground spraying. These were small trial sites designed as an experiment, so special acknowledgement to Mark and Barb, who provided great advice and support across all aspects of this project. Training from Western Australian experts in the identification of the disease and treatment using phosphate was organised, and then we were able to train traditional owner groups in the use of phosphate application. We devised a simple vegetation analysis monitoring system for pre and post spraying efficacy, and we had a PhD student who was Campbell Learmonth, which undertook a phytotoxicity testing at trial treatment sites and tested in the laboratory for the disease at sites across the Otways. Monitoring was designed for ground staff. It had to be simple and user-friendly, but still be able to show a change in the structure after time at the test sites. We used the Survey 123 app with a simple schema to quantitatively look at the cover of functional groups, number of key susceptible species, cover of bare ground, and any impacts of phytotoxicity. Aerial spray monitoring, we looked at canopy penetration, and that was assessed using water-sensitive paper strips that were pinned to target species across treatment, adjacent and control sites. Assessment of spray percentage coverage was made using the SnapCard app. Phytotoxicity was visually assessed according to the 4-point rating scale developed by Walker. Ratings in this scale are 0 equals no leaf burn, 1 equals leaf burn, restricted to the tips of new growth, 2 is extensive burn to new growth, and 3 severe leaf burn to both new and mature leaves. We also looked at rehabilitation of post-infection landscapes. We had 12 sites in total, 6 were treated with phosphate and 6 not, which were used as the control. We used locally sourced seed grown by local nurseries. Experimental plots had plants treated with phosphate plus the control sites. A vegetation analysis will be done to assess the progress post-planting. Key species planted to introduce complexity back into vegetation were Alocasarina, Xanthorrhoeas, We later also plan to introduce isopogons, banksias, and persunias. The preliminary results from the rehabilitation trial, we had 61% survival 1 year post-planting with 70% survival of austral grass trees, which was really good. The challenges we faced with this project were procurement of local provenance, especially the grass trees. The site environmental conditions appear to have affected success, and this could be due to the fact that we've just come off of subsequent La Nina years, so much wetter than normal conditions in some of these sites, thinking that that may have influenced how the survival rates were. The other challenge was the site access. A lot of it was only accessible by foot, so that prevented sort of logistical challenges at accessing the sites. Phase 2 of this trial is to have extra planting of austral grass trees and additional planting around existing islands and shade, and look at broader species assemblage for future plantings such as hakea, isopogons, and banksias. And I'll pass back to Jess to talk about education and engagement.
Thanks, Michael. Look, education engagement was really important because in Victoria, there hasn't been a lot of publicity around this disease and its impact. So part of this program involved devising a hygiene training program similar to the Green Card training program in Western Australia. And key land management agencies and community groups were trained. We've engaged over 250 participants so far, and we're continuing with that. We started with Parks Victoria and DECA, but we moved on to other organisations like local shires, the CFA, and the community groups. We produced brochures and posters and a training video, which is on our web portal. And there's also data visualisations of the findings that we had from our mapping program. We also produced hygiene guidelines and standard operating procedures, which didn't exist for some of the organisations across Victoria. And finally, we had a media campaign. Media coverage has been really important, and it's been extensive in getting the broader community on board with the Phytophthora management and hygiene. Phytophthora has a low profile in Victoria in the past, and this has given us an opportunity to lead the way and to raise awareness within both the agencies and the community. Thanks very much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here, and any questions?
Are the agencies in Victoria able to mandate training and hygiene practices for doing work, soil disturbance works and other works in protected areas?
That's probably a good question for Michael.
I guess with this project, it's the start of it. So we hope to kind of build some of the learnings from the Wild Otways project into some of our, I guess, standard management practice. We're definitely not at the same level that Western Australia is with theirs, but it's definitely a really good, I guess, platform to start doing that, particularly in the Otways and across the state in Victoria. Would be really keen to keep the momentum going. It's hard with Phytophthora because it has had little, I guess, runs in the past where people have been quite interested, and then for whatever, various people have moved on. So I think we're quite lucky at the moment that we've got quite a good group of people that are keen to work on it and keep promoting the hygiene and trying to build that just into our standard management practices across the region.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I apologise, but we will probably have to move on to the next speaker, just given time spring. But thank you very much, Jessica and Michael, for a wonderful presentation.
No worries. Thanks very much. Thanks for your time.